Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm doing a weekly reads, weekly review, 11 books to get through, so I'll try to be quick. First, I started off with a banger, as Marc seems to always be. Stories we tell our children. I was a little bit hesitant to get into because I don't have kids. I don't particularly have an interest in rearing children, but the framing of this is actually really quite interesting, and I think Marc understands the shortcomings of short stories very well, because the thematic coherence between it, all of the stories contribute to the overall themes and what he has to communicate about child rearing. It's very eclectic. It ranges, I guess you could say, in a genre type of way, but I would say more tonally, I guess, from a sort of dark retelling of Cinderella to like a really meaningful, moving story about a woman who somehow sort of remembers her father feeding her at a very young age, and it felt like the first sort of impingement on her freedom and her body, which perpetuated and set sort of the tone or future occurrences between her and men wanting to and not abiding by the rules of her body, except that it's from the father essentially just trying to get her to eat, like the frustration of spoon feeding a child that doesn't want to take in the food, which I've witnessed myself. My brother has 2 kids. There's whole comedy bits relegated to kids essentially not understanding that they need to survive and have a balanced diet and whatnot, and simply not wanting to eat, and the frustration between parent and child. And so he sort of like just rams the food down her throat, basically. But then it essentially is like a traumatic moment for her. And I thought that was very moving, handled very respectfully and well by Marc, and just like all of the other stories, said a lot more than I was expecting about child rearing in general. And then the stories that I wasn't fully invested in, Marc's prose carry it through anyway. Like, he has such a knack for writing playful, engaging prose that regardless of the subject matter, you're getting something out of just from consuming. Like, it's just interesting to consume the actual sentence by sentence nature of it. So there's one particular story about twins in this that I don't think I'm going to go into because it's very I'm a twin, and one of the twins really sees life in a similar way to me, and I really connected with it. It was just really interesting to see and surprising to see an outlook fully captured, at least mostly, and explored in that way. And then the ending was just sublime to that story as well. It's just like a lot more in-depth and cerebral than I was expecting, and wonderful. Next, I read Wintering: The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times by Katherine on audio. I gave this 3 stars. I don't have too much to say about it. It sort of does what it says it does on the tin. I kind of expected it to be a little bit more moving, which is weird, but I read it when I was feeling down, and I thought reading a person being down and sort of coming out of the rut and not glorifying, but feeling empowered in wintering themselves and not being against the grain, I guess you could say, and not going out and not socializing and being introspective, insular, just not a typical outgoing, socialized, as we are supposed to be doing type of person. But it vacillated greatly for me because she would come up with these very fantastic insights, usually at the end of the chapter, but how she got to them rarely, it wasn't like a show your work kind of moment. It was mostly like, let me tell you a little bit about my life and then hit you with some knowledge. You know, it was too self-helpy for me, you know. Anytime there's like prescriptive stuff like that, it bothers me, and I'd rather get it out of the narrative. But she didn't really seem like she wanted to embed the stuff that she wanted to say within the narrative usually. Some of the moments definitely hit, and I think it was successful exactly at what it was trying to do, but I misconstrued or was projecting maybe on what I thought it was, because it didn't seem from the reviews and all that kind of stuff that it was, you know, intersectional self-help stuff, and I think it definitely is. All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. I gave 4 stars. It is a memoir that I consumed on audio. Great stuff. It's a queer memoir about a black man who grows up and isn't sure about his sexuality, and it's blatantly about wanting to put more of that narrative out in the ecosystem so that young people like him can find the books and self-identify and kind of like understand the stuff that's going on, because in school none of that stuff is taught, neither in sex education, socialization. The books that are recommended and given in schools, obviously none of that covers the stuff that he was trying to work through as a queer person. And so yeah, fantastic stuff. I wouldn't say the prose are like completely stand out. He's a very young person, so doesn't have like intensely profound stuff, yet it is a worthwhile important narrative to have out there as a young person for other young people. So yeah. Next, This Tender Land, William Kent Krueger. I gave this 4 stars. This is I feel similarly about Ordinary Grace. It exceeded my expectations very well. It didn't blow me away. It's about 2 brothers who are in a residential school, and they run away with some other kids and just try to find anything better that must be better. They kind of like characterize the woman running it as a witch, and then they run into the woods, so it parallels kind of like folkloric elements and sets up some interesting narrative tensions about what might be happening. And it also has kind of like Big Fish vibes, where the person, one of the brothers, is the narrator at a later point in life, giving you the story about the runaway and what happened to them, ping-ponging from interesting event to the other. And so he has very good powers of observation and reflection, and it's not a childhood narrative, which is excellent for me because I generally can't stand them. And he is very explicit about this being like kind of the way it happened, like similar to the beginning of Big Fish, where it's like, this is the story of my father, but it's like colored and peopled with things that may or may not exist, and I'm not going to tell you what's real and what's not real. Like, part of the journey is just enjoying those aspects, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. It has a heavy hand with some things that make it feel like it is too quintessential maybe of a thing to have happened, that it becomes contrived. But it does generally handle those quintessential elements that could be very tropey exceptionally well. So it's always enjoyable, even when it strays into trite territory. It I don't know, saves itself, I guess, by veering left. So it's definitely worth it for that. It again is sort of like a meditation on faith, belief in other people, in yourself, and I would say mostly in other people. Like a lot of his problems are, maybe not a lot of them, but some of them are self-made and could be circumvented if he had more faith in other people and reacts in a poor way to assumptions that he has about them. And it very much spirals or snowballs, whatever analogy you'd like to use. Very pleasant, good stuff. I saw this on AJ Dunn's channel and a Bookworm Adventure Girl, both of whom I think have great reviews of it, and you should check out. Next, I read on audio The Shining Girls by Lauren Beukes. Beukes. I gave this 3 stars. It is a commercial fiction, does what it says it does on the tin, as most of my 3-star reviews are. Thriller with supernatural elements in which a killer finds a house that enables them to time travel, and he uses the house to hunt girls who turn into women, not grooming them, but like essentially like cultivating fear in them from girls, and then almost harvesting it or cashing in on it later. So he's like very sadistic, a very quintessential killer, like whatever you're imagining from any thriller or Hannibal Lecter type show. Maybe I wouldn't say Hannibal Lecter because Hannibal Lecter is a complex character, but a tropey villain who just wants to hurt people and is psychotic. Very like bare bones killer and characterization. The pleasure of the narrative comes from multiple points of view with all of the girls throughout time, and the narrative shifting those time points between characters, including the killer assuming narrative points, hunting them and them trying to figure out what's going on and save themselves and whatnot. And I'd say it's really good at tension. It's fairly novel in concept. If you like the premise and you need the premise explained, you will hate this book because it doesn't. It's just an assumption that it makes in the narrative, and then you just go with it. Like how the time travel happens, no clue. Could tell you. And how any of the specific functions of the travel, and kind of even like you kind of get what he gets out of doing this thing, but it's mostly just he's evil and he's sadistic, so that's why he's doing it. So it's definitely not nuanced. It's very thriller. Like chapters on audio are like 3-4 minutes, so it's frenetic and an onslaught essentially. I picked it up because it's a Apple TV series that is coming out. The narrative is very cinematic, so I see why they did that. I wouldn't be surprised if the show was better than the book, because it probably is going to characterize people more than the book has time to do. But it's a fine functioning story that does no more than that. Like it just validates, I think, its premise and is fine. The ending is a little tropey, but it's fine. Next, I read a fantastic book that I saw on Marc Nash's channel some time ago, probably a year ago. Maybe one of the first videos that it organically or whatever showed me on the home screen. ATTA by Jarett Kobek, which Marc Nash then subsequently talked about a couple times, especially I think he has a specific video just on Kobek. But this is a fantastic, phenomenal piece of writing. It is fiction based on an actual person, ATTA, who is the sort of leader of the cell of the person who took over one of the planes that took place in 9/11 and struck a tower and was actually successful at it. It is very well researched, but places all of the information organically. It's like the ultimate show don't tell type of book. It goes into his childhood, his rearing, all the way through the actual event. And then the actual final chapters actually proceed to go into a different character. But yeah, it is maybe one of the most compelling narrators' voices that I've ever come across. The flow is exceptional. The dialogue, incredible. There's not a space wasted. I fairly completely flew through this book. It isn't attempting to make you like ATTA whatsoever, but it does interrogate the notion of when people say, I couldn't imagine anybody who could do such a thing, or they must be a villain, or like the caricature that has been constructed of Middle Eastern people, especially Afghans, from terrorist events like that, and Islamic followers being conflated with the beliefs of people like this, the fundamentalists, the radicals. it interrogates that completely, because essentially this feels like somebody said, I can't imagine anybody who would do that, and Kobek said, I can quite easily. I imagine he put a lot of research into this, but what it boils down to is just the core relationship of all men, I think, socialized in all societies that I can think of, which is, it boils down to shame. He feels very diminutive. He wants to supplant every sort of father figure in his life, and he uses, scripture in order to validate his views, which is a view of hate towards basically everybody. He doesn't even allow love in his own heart, despite realizing on a specific trip that God is love. Lolita uses the seductive prose to try to lure you into it, whereas this does not. But the point is the same, in the sense that it is horrific to bear witness to motivated thinking at that degree. No amount of other information, relation to other people. He thinks he has empathy but does not. Nothing can really sway him. And even when he kind of has his blinders off, the ability or the opportunity for him to, again, supplant another male, or to prove his worth against somebody else that he sees as like unclean or unworthy or whatever, takes hold. So it even is like a fallacy baked into his own work, his own viewpoint, and yet still goes through with it. It is, absolutely phenomenal. I have of a mind that I think fiction should be challenging like this, and I think it is masterfully handled. It is actually kind of strange, because I saw some reviews where they were like, this adds nothing that we don't already know about ATTA, but I guess if you read nonfiction about this person, then you would similarly know what Kobek knows about the person. But assuming the role of the person isn't the same as knowing all of the facts about the person, right? And so I think similarly to Lolita, it's kind of like recommended required reading, especially for people that think they have very solidified views, don't consider other viewpoints but think they do. Like, basically a really good way to check yourself and consider your own motivated thinking. Next, I read volume 3 of Unwritten, and I rated this 5 stars as well. It was, of course, 5 stars. I read this in my singles format, so that's neat. I did this because I generally like reading on my 2-in-1 tablet, like a laptop, because it has a bigger screen and it kind of makes it feel oversized and it's HD. But Comixology nuked their browser support, so you can't do that anymore. So luckily I already owned this series, and I reviewed the deluxe version of the first one that came out before, and then TC declined to continue publishing those. So I just have my singles, which is perfectly fine. The covers are absolutely incredible. And this series really picks up around now. It also, I want to see, this issue has a really interesting take. One of the characters, Lizzie, pictured here, has her own issue that is double. It's the normal page count, but it's split in 2, so it's double the page count essentially. And it's choose your own adventure, learning about her backstory, which is phenomenal. Excellent concept that's executed perfectly. You can have a lot of fun tracing the paths, of which I think there are 4 or 5, something like that. It is really interesting to find out about her. This is a story about a boy named Tommy Taylor. His father, Wilson something, I can't remember, penned books that were like Harry Potter in this world, and he's the real life son who the character was based on. So fans and who are have a parasocial relationship essentially with that series imprinted on him and love him and all this stuff. And then it's revealed that he may or may not be the actual son of Wilson. All this wild stuff is happening. a cabal is revealed to have been basically embodying mainstream culture and taking control of literature and controlling the narrative and the cultural consciousness in order to control people, basically. And they are aligned against that, but it's also more about like interrogating what it means for people to believe in a story, the power that has as an effect in the world, how to co-opt it, how to manipulate things. And then also there's a meta component that's interrogating stories itself, in which they can enter the physical space of actual stories, which will be primarily the next volume and will be incredible. I'm very excited to get to that. Next, another 5-star read. Like I said, it's been a phenomenal reading week. MUSOS by Charlene Elsby, a Canadian. I've reviewed 2 other books of hers that I thought were amazing, Psychros and Affect. This leans more into the horror category, I would say. This is her first male character, and it interrogates basically like the male operating system. It is another book kind of similar to ATTA in that it drills down into the workings of the modern man and what is their primary drive and force for the interactions that they have with the girls and women in their lives. And it again boils down to shame. But this is beautifully written. It's stream of consciousness, so sort of modernist, but very different because it showcases thoughts that they don't intend to show the reader themselves, and may not be aware that they are sharing at points as well. So it's very unreliable. It's about a man who may or may not have killed a woman named Laura, and then us going into different aspects, like the scenes are framed as may or may not be memories of this man's past, or it could be like a fantasy playing out when he meets Laura. It's very subjective, so it's very fun to read, and you could come up with, I think, a lot of different readings of this book. And it is got a little bit of a play with form and type, but the interesting thing about it is really how it disassembles selfhood for the character and kind of shows past, present, and future of the character in a very kind of like feminist way, where it's showcasing that from the very first interaction with a woman, you can kind of see how this would play out, but then we also don't know if it's real or not, right? Like it could be a fantasy that cascades from his memory, or it could all be a fruition from like his actual life, or there's a lot of different contexts to which you could place each of the different scenes, which is very cool. And yeah, he's just a very unlikable, POS kind of character that is constantly justifying his actions. It paired very nicely with ATTA in that way. You see, again, motivated thinking. Nothing is their fault. It's always the person's obsessions that they're placing responsibility on. A very good indictment, I would say, of the typical misogynistic male who is currently allowed to, get away with much in our society. I then read Grown Ups by Miriam Keyes. I did this dual reading and on audio because I love Keyes' narration. She's fantastic. I heard her interview the author of The Thursday Murder Club before, and it was just a fantastic conversation that they had about characters and comedy especially. And it's obviously got nothing to do, well, maybe not obviously, but it has nothing to do with murder. It is an examination of a dysfunctional family that is unwilling to interrogate the issues that it has. Strangely, the inciting incident takes place I would say 3/4 of the way through the book, so it's weird that they put that on the marketing copy. It is mostly simply a family drama about what happens to people's psyches, how they act out, their impact on their physical and mental health for not dealing with things. I really like that type of story, similar to like Apples Never Fall, that I really liked as well. Though I gave this 4 stars because it feels padded out and a little too chunky. Like, it is definitely meandering at points and doesn't care about typical pacing, but is written as like a market commercial fiction type stuff. It is definitely funny. It's kind of effective in its satire of like a nuclear family, but mostly concerned with making a human or humanistic, I guess, viewpoint for all of the characters, like showing their foibles and their failings, especially as people, yet giving them space to be loved and deserve love, despite some of the horrible things that they do and perpetuate onto other people and stuff. They're not like abusers, although one of the husbands comes close. I think he's very like manipulative of his wife, almost like a Modern Family, but not specifically situational comedy, right? Next, I read Mona by Paula Olenero. This is about a young woman. She is like fairly new but successful at entering the literary scene. She's invited to, I can't remember what the reward's called, but a reward ceremony in Sweden in order to, because she is nominated and probably has a good chance of winning. And so it is a like opportunity to essentially create a micro world of all the different characters of literary people, some of whom might be reminiscent of real people, some of whom may not, and a lot of them I think are echoes of past writers, as is Mona herself. I think she embodies a lot of the characteristics of the much lauded and venerated old school type of writers, where like Bukowski, Hemingway, toxic kind of shit like that, where like their pain drive their art, and so they were given a lot of latitude for being shitty people. She leverages that in a like PC culture / progressive culture kind of way, where she knows she's playing the game, and is completely fine with it, because otherwise she wouldn't be allowed to participate in the game as a Latina woman. Like, she would be discarded like a lot of people when they submit manuscripts and stuff. So she knows she is playing into the toxic game, yet despises herself and other people for playing it at the same time. And so it's very like meta literary person / critic balled into one. So she's not like a likable character whatsoever, but you're not supposed to like her whatsoever either. Like she is supposed to be rage inducing for either side, basically, like whether you hate identity politics or love it, and also a reflection in the mirror of those people, kind of showing like the hypocrisy of participating in something like that. But beautifully, I think this encapsulates the notion that Americans refuse to interrogate at any given situation, is that they are very good, I find, at not acknowledging that one of their primary exports is their culture. Everyone else in the world generally talks about American culture as an export, except for Americans, who don't seem to know what's going on or acknowledge it or anything like that, because that would mean that they have influence over the world and are therefore responsible for that influence. And so it really embodies the sort of like toxic left identity politics stuff, where it's good that we're bringing up this stuff, but we're not good at framing the conversation in a productive way, and it ends up completely just policing usually marginalized identities into a bullying kind of way. A lot of it is sort of interrogating the notion of like, how is somebody who has to participate in this dance of subjugating parts of her identity in order to coin currency with the crowd and win money instead of going broke, essentially, and needs to eat. being held to a specific standard that nobody else meets and that America won't ever like acknowledge and whatnot. And yet it's all mirrored in marginalized identities, primarily embodying those aspects of the culture. So it's just, I find it very like high level, cerebral, very interesting satirical stuff. I wouldn't say it's like laugh out loud funny, at least for me, but rarely would that happen for me. But like a meta construction, it was ticking like all of my boxes and then some. I thought it was very clever at what it was doing and multi-pronged in its approach. Then on top of that, we have a interrogation kind of the embodiment of Mona, where she represents the two sides of the coin at the same time. She clearly is masking something going on with her throughout it. She keeps engaging in vices, again, kind of like Bukowski-esque, like alcohol, masturbation, also kind of probably intentionally mirroring the idea of resistance in actual writing, where writers, instead of writing, will indulge in vices instead of actual writing, and they call this resistance, or some people do. So it's kind of a brilliant mirror there as well. But clearly she's unable to handle herself. Like, her performance is harming something internal with her. And this all comes to a head beautifully with the award ceremony. So there's simultaneously like two plots happening, this sort of meta stuff happening where she's interrogating all the different fallacies and the satirical aspects, as well as like a personal, much more personal narrative about like the cost of being subsumed by the dance that you have to do in order to succeed. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I gave it 5 stars if you can't tell. And then lastly, I just finished this a few hours ago, Pleasantville. I don't have too much to say about this. It's the follow-up to, what was it, Blackwater Rising. I really liked that book. It is about Jay Porter, who is a lawyer who is like semi-retired but helps out people predominantly in a black neighborhood, of which he is as well, with various like problems that other people don't seem to give a shit about. In this one, he's like kind of tying up his life. It's like almost like a coda to the previous book, in which he's like, okay, I'm out. I'm just like, screw this stuff. I'm gonna take care of my kids. I'm gone. But he has one last case that he needs to tie up, and it's with a huge corporation and lots of plaintiffs. And then a girl is ostensibly murdered. She goes missing, so people assume that she's dead and may or may not be. And so then this is happening in Pleasantville, which is a predominantly black neighborhood in the 95, 96, mid-90s, I think, era. And they have managed to form a neighborhood and an elementary school in which the neighborhood is able to vote and affect very heavily the election. And so there's a lot of stakes that come to a head at the same point as this girl goes missing, because one of the candidates' son is indicted, like charged for the murder of this young girl with completely circumstantial evidence, right? So it seems like it's kind of a play to blacklist that one guy into not being able to win, because it seems odd that they are charging him with like very, again, circumstantial, but like the flimsiest stuff that even to me it seemed wild that they would be charging him. So there's the political stuff that's happening, and it is a political drama. So it's methodical in its pacing. If you've never read one, it's much slower than a thriller. Don't expect that. It has a lot of narrative tension because there is the home life, there's the main case that he is working on, and then there's the girl gone missing / is this guy a killer type thing. And he is asked to represent the guy, even though he hasn't been a criminal lawyer specifically for like a long time. I think it's like a decade. So there's a lot of stuff with that. And then, of course, everything comes to a head. It's obviously about gerrymandering as well. So yeah, I think it's just fantastic that she's able to weave all of this stuff together, talk about something that is very meaningful in a like not show my hand kind of way, and effectively show people like what is being taken away from people in districts like this as early or as late, depending on when you look at it, as 95, and what is obviously still happening. And then it's just you know, a very pleasant, well-plotted, and methodical paced book that was 4 stars. So that's it. That's my weekly review. It seemed like this might be fairly long, so thank you for sticking with me. I'll have timestamps below, I'm sure. And if I don't, then poke me, because I should make those, especially for long videos. If you have read any of these, I'd love to know what you thought. If you have any thoughts about my own thoughts, then put that in the comments. And yeah, let's have a discussion. And I will see you next video. Bye.